Good evening, everyone, and welcome to TransChat. TransChat is a virtual town hall series focusing on the transgender experience and all aspects of that. This is brought to you by Equality Florida. Good evening, I'm Gina Duncan, and I'm the Director of Transgender Equality at Equality Florida. This is our fourth TransAction TransChat town hall this week, and thanks to you and our amazing speakers, we certainly will be doing TransChat in the future. Tonight, we're very excited to be discussing transgender leadership, where we are, where we need to go, and how do we get there. Our speakers join us from our TransAction Advisory Council, and I'm so pleased to welcome to the stage our three amazing speakers. Our first speaker is Ashley Figueroa. Ashley is an advocate, a community leader, and a proud, open, trans Latina woman. She works on several Central Florida community organizations, the Orange County History Center, the National Network Latin Plus, founder and creator of the Bliss Cares Transformation Program. She's also a member of the Orlando Trans Collective, and she and Nicole have recently launched the Gender Advancement Project. She certainly is an amazing community advocate and proud to have her on our TransAction Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Ashley Figueroa.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Gina. Good to see you.
Hello, Ashley. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Very nice to be here this afternoon, this evening.
It's good to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Our next speaker is Nathan Broomer. In Nathan's own words, Nathan is a transgender man who advocates for all who experience discrimination and exclusion because of unequal power relationships across the economic, political, social, and cultural dimensions. Nathan is a native Floridian, which is rare. He was born and raised in the Tampa Bay area. He's a former public school teacher. He's a graduate of the University of South Florida and the Stetson University College of Law. He's also the founder of the Trans Pride March at the St. Pete Pride event and currently vice president of the St. Pete Pride Board. He's the legislative director for the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus. He's one of our Equality Florida board members and also, of course, one of our TransAction Advisory Council members. Nathan Broomer.
Hi, Gina. Hey, Ashley.
Nathan, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Our third speaker is Nicole Parker. Nicole Parker is a transgender woman of Black, Puerto Rican, and Italian descent. What an amazing combination, right? Born and raised in Orlando, at age 19, she left her home and her job to begin her transition. But after 3 years of black market hormones and unsafe lifestyle practices, she returned to Orlando to restart her life. And restart it, she certainly has. She currently works for the One Pulse Foundation, as well as working for our very own TransAction project and is our TransAction project coordinator. She has served on several nonprofit boards across Central Florida, the LGBT Center, Orlando United Assistance Center, Spectrum Health's Board of Directors, and Peer Support Space Board. She co-leads Orlando's Trans Collective. She currently, with Ashley, is launching the Gender Advancement Project. In 2019, she was chosen as one of Orlando's most remarkable people. She's also, of course, a member of our TransAction Advisory Council. Please join me in welcoming Nicole Parker.
Hello. Hi, Gina, Nicole, Nathan, Ashley. How are you?
Good, thank you. Really good to see you.
Good, nice to see you too. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to close out this amazing week of learning more about the transgender experience. You know, we started on Monday with a discussion about the transgender masculine experience. On Tuesday, we talked about the Black transgender experience. On Wednesday, we spoke about the non-binary experience. And tonight, we're going to talk about leadership, what it means to be a transgender leader and the dynamics there. But first, I wanted to ask you to reflect back a little bit on those first 3 sessions. The speakers were amazing. The audience was so engaged, but wanted to ask what you thought were your takeaways, the thoughts of those sessions. So let's kick it off with you, Ashley. Any thoughts on the previous sessions?
Yes, absolutely. It was really, really great to see how, we are now utilizing and empowering individuals of all types of, diversities, from a very diverse group, to be able to share their stories and empower them with that. That is so empowering for our individuals of our community to actually, for many years, we didn't have this type of platform, right? To shadow and highlight stories, outside of, murders and things like that. And so the fact that we're doing this is really empowering, and it's creating a lot of empowering and creating those leaders in our community.
Nicole, how about you? Now, you moderated 2 of these, so thank you for doing that. You did an amazing job in facilitating those sessions. So what were your thoughts?
Thank you. It was just incredible. And one of my biggest takeaways was the vulnerability. I think when you look at those sessions, everyone who was talking and giving their personal story was really vulnerable and open. And I think that's so important, because when you're thinking of people who may not understand what someone who's trans goes through, what someone who's non-binary goes through, when you start to hear these stories and be able to put a face to a situation, it brings back the humanity to it. So it was just really amazing to see so many diverse people be able to come on and share their story comfortably, because as all of us know, there was a time where we couldn't be open about who we were. The goal was to just get through life and not say anything. And now we can embrace living out loud. Now we can create platforms like this for children who, I'm sure all of us, when we transition, wish we had something that we could go look at and answer our questions for us. So it was just an honor to be a part of it. And I just loved the vulnerability that came out of it.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. I certainly share that. We often talk about visibility being so important, and to hear people really open up and tell their personal stories and how that related to their experiences was really powerful. Nathan, how about you?
Yeah, I enjoyed all of them as just an audience member. I think for me, I echo everything Ashley and Nicole said, but I frankly just appreciated seeing so many different voices from the community. I mean, there are a lot of events just a few years ago I would go to as the only transgender person at the event. And frankly, I think also in the midst of COVID-19, to connect and see so many faces, I needed the connection with community as much as, I appreciate the visibility for the bigger, mission of the work that we do with Equality Florida and TransAction Florida. It personally was just great to connect and see everybody's faces.
Yeah, thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. And I was just thinking the same thing when you were saying that for so long, you would go to events and there would be very few transgender people in the room. And now it's so refreshing and so empowering to see so many people who are not only participating in events like this and stepping out, to not only find their voice, but also to make sure that their community and their platform is heard. And I think that's so powerful. And it's been a very meaningful week for me as well.
For sure.
Let me pivot from there. And, you know, all of you are amazing community leaders, and you have so many things on your plate. But tell everyone who or what motivated you, or what motivates you to put yourself out there to lead. What's your driver? What's your true north in reference to the work that you do? Nathan, let's start with you this time.
Okay, thanks. I think for me as a native Floridian, I remember my younger self often, and am frankly motivated by our youth, and by the families. And I think in this moment in time, I'm really motivated by the growth of the visibility of our community, that we're at sort of this really pivotal moment where so many things are coming together to sort of launch us into what I think will be the next necessary push in our advocacy. And we need more visible voices. We need our entire community represented and in leadership positions and involved. And this series of conversations, frankly, is a great step in that direction. But it is definitely the youth who I think of often and carry with me into my meetings when I'm advocating.
Thank you for that. Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, for me, you know, what motivated me was, you know, the fact that when I first did my transition, I wanted to live a self-life because of the fear of discrimination and violence and all that. And so I don't want to be a victim of that. I wanted to avoid that, you know, as a shield to protect myself. And so one day I just finally realized that, you know, this is something that a lot of us, you know, are going through. A lot of fears, they do exist. And so I wanted to open up and share my story for that reason, because a lot of those people don't have a voice. And I have, you know, in a way, I've been privileged to be invited to these tables and all that. And so I wanted to make sure that, you know, for those individuals that, you know, are not able for their voices to be heard, that, you know, I do the work for them as well, advocate on their behalf.
Thank you. So
You're
powerful. Nicole.
So I think like what kind of inspired me was twofold. I think first and foremost, in the beginning of my transition, you meet a lot of people, you know what I mean? I wanted to know what it was to transition, meet people who had, and it was this consistent theme of we get this much of the pie and just deal with it. And that never really sat right with me. I'm like, okay, just because we're a marginalized group of people, why do we get the smallest piece? And a lot of people that I talked to, they were like, this is our life, girl. Just get used to it, figure it out, and, you know, navigate through it. And it never sat well. I'm like, okay, I think, you know, we can do anything we want as humans. We're not stopped because of our gender, our sexuality, anything like that. It's about what you want to do and what you put your mind to. And as time went on, it just didn't sit right. And when I came back to Orlando, I realized, I'm like, where's the support? You can go to the clubs and see trans girls, for in my instance. Like I could see trans girls and talk to them, but I was like, where are like the support groups? So where are the counselors or any mental health professional that outwardly say, I support trans individuals or LGBTQ people as a whole? And when I started to not see that, and then I fell into nonprofit and I started to realize, oh, there's initiatives working on this. There's people that are seeing these gaps and want to change it. And I wanted to be a part of that. And then I think the second piece was, it was something in me that was like, I want people to know that if I can do it, you can do it. I remember being in the space of, am I strong enough to transition? Will I ever have enough money? Will I ever look the way that I want to look? Will I ever feel the way that I wanted to feel? And I know how it is to be in that sunken space where you're just like, is it worth it? And I just want people to know that it is worth it. It's going to be hard. You're going to have your struggles, but that's anything in life. Ultimately, if you continue to push forward, you can achieve it. So that's kind of what pushed me to do advocacy work.
Amazing. Thank you for telling that story. So now let's go deep. You know, well, let's get in it. Y'all are leaders in the TransAction Advisory Council and so many other organizations. Let's talk about diversity. You know, and we saw that this week with our different panels and our amazing featured speakers, but it also speaks to the way our community is evolving, right? You know, we used to be this umbrella transgender community, and there are now people within our community who identify as non-binary, and even don't feel they fall under that moniker of being transgender, because they didn't transition. So we have non-binary people, we have different races within our community also as well that have different needs. So number one, how do we ensure that we have a cohesive community? You know, our differences, our strength kind of mentality, and at the same time respect everyone's identities. So we don't lose someone who their power and their strength comes from being a Black trans woman or a non-binary person, that we continue to validate those strengths, but at the same time, we have a unified voice in reference to moving the community forward. Who'd like to jump on that one first? Go for it, Nicole.
I think it's up to us as a community to understand and own that we are the worst to each other. I think we kind of have to start there, that I don't know what it is, but us as a community, sometimes, you know, one identity doesn't understand the other or whatever the case may be. I think we all need to kind of come together and really just accept everybody. And I'm starting to see that, like with non-binary leaders coming out and speaking and giving their experience and starting to open up people's minds. It's what we had to do as trans people. So if you look at it, like LGB, super progressive. T, probably like 10 years behind. Queer or non-binary individuals, 10 years behind that, you know? And I think we have to always make sure that when we look at it, we're pushing the whole movement forward versus just whatever, you know, you identify as. And I think once we accept everybody and accept everybody for their identity, then we can kind of be a cohesive community, you know? And of course, that's easier said than done, but I see the progress. And that's the beautiful thing. I see that non-binary individuals are being included. Certain states are allowing them to put X on the driver's license, you know, like we're making strides as a whole community. So I think just continuing to do that and really taking ownership on our end that we may not be the best and we can work on some things so we can move this forward together.
Yeah. Yeah. Validation and affirming everyone, you know, within the community and making sure that everyone feels valued as the movement goes forward. Ashley, how about you?
Yeah, you know, we really can't forget, you know, that a lot of us are all working at this together for one common goal, right? And it's eventually that one day, you know, we don't have those issues that exist when it comes to, you know, how our community is under attack, you know? And so that work is not something that could be done by just one person. And at the end of the day, you know, we have that ultimate goal. And that's why it's so important for all of us to come together and work, because reality is that, you know, there is strength in numbers, you know? And so the more people that unite and we work together toward that, is the more, you know, success that we're going to have. You know, we're going to have a lot more progress. So that's really something that I always say is, you know what, I understand, you know, we all have our differences and everything like that, but you know what, we need to work together. And a lot of it is for those that are coming, right? Those that are, you know, that are growing up, the teens and everything like that, the youth. You know, those are the individuals that eventually the work that we're doing now, because we know it takes time, you know, that down the line, you know, 10 years on the line, it's less of fighting for their rights.
Wonderfully put. Yeah. Clicks on that. Nathan, how about you?
Yeah, I think to reflect back on one of the prior TransChat sessions, I think it was one that Nicole moderated. I heard everyone talk about accountability. Like as a community, I think we have to hold ourselves accountable. So within broader LGBTQ plus organizations, you know, when the T and the Q, or even frankly, sometimes the B is silent and forgotten, we have to elevate those voices, and we have to do that for one another. And if we don't see leadership or we don't see membership reflecting the community, those of us who are here need to make sure we're including and forcing that message. I mean, I sit on several boards and sit on those boards as the only, you know, transgender member. And part of that is my privilege. And I have to call that out. I should not be the only board member. There should not just be a white trans board member on this board. And we have to hold our organizations accountable and create channels that create those opportunities. And I think we are starting to do that. I've seen a lot of growth the last few years, and 20 years ago, I didn't see it at all. I mean, I appreciate social media. I appreciate technology creating some of those opportunities. We've got a long way to go, but we have to do it, and we have to do it proactively, and we have to call it out for exactly what it is. And we're stronger together. I mean, I think a lot of times in the early days, we were so, at least, you know, the experiences that I had, we were scared. We feared for our safety. I remember feeling sort of desperate to get resources, and everybody sort of scrambling for that. And we have created some avenues that I think we now need to really take to the next level. And we will all be better for it when we do that intentionally and intersectionally.
Yeah, something that Ashley said is so true about the new leaders, and it's for the youth. It's, I think, something that we're great about, but we have to continue doing is uplifting those new emerging leaders.
Yeah.
You're starting to see people who are like, I have a story, I have a voice, and I want to use it. And we as a community have to embrace and bring them up. You know what I mean? Because the more visibility, the more stories that are out there, the more understanding and knowledge gets put out there.
Yeah, and you know, that's a great point. And even this afternoon, we had another one of our TransAction Leadership Academy classes. We launched this program in St. Petersburg. It was our first class. It was 6 months. At the end of it, the classmates, young people, trans and non-binary people between the ages of 18 and 30. And at the end of the session, they give a dissertation. They're given a certificate. And we really value their input. And you can just see them evolve over the 6 months that they go through this program. So I couldn't agree more with you in the fact that we do need to continue to stay focused on young voices and continue to develop the next, you know, generation of leaders. But that also speaks to, you know, this unusual dynamic that I think Nathan was alluding to is, you know, that old adage of it's not about us without us. And I know, Ashley, this is super important for you, that organizations are trans-led for the trans community. So Ashley, maybe you could kick us off in reference to that. Your thoughts there.
You know, for the longest time ever, you know, like I mentioned in the beginning, you know, and I've heard a lot of my partners here that also have touched on, is that a lot of, for the longest time, they didn't have people that look like us, you know, in positions of, you know, management and positions of leadership. And so the times have changed, but at the same time, there's still a lot of progress that has to be made. And within that progress that still needs to be achieved is, you know, having organizations that are trans-led. You know, the trans community knows what the trans community needs. And so empowering the individuals to actually be their own leaders of organizations for their own community is very, very empowering, and something that, you know, we're seeing is going to help the community a lot. Because oftentimes, and I always advocate and encourage individuals, you know, to utilize the resources that are out there and all that. But reality is that we're still in times where a lot of individuals who identify within the LGBTQ community, especially the transgender and non-binary community, they don't feel comfortable going to a lot of places, right? And seeking the help that they need. And the rejection that they get, you know, at home, and when it comes to public employment and accommodations, you know, and all those things, it's still not there. So therefore, if we have individuals of experience who are there to assist them, a lot of times it's going to allow us individuals to actually reach out and get the help that they need. While at the same time, we're in a way policing almost, you know, like those services that are rendered to our community, making sure that the other organizations, that businesses, that they're being culturally competent when it comes to, you know, our community and how they're catering those services and resources.
Oh, clicks, girl. Nailed that. I couldn't agree more. Spot on.
That competency piece, though. That competency piece, that's a big thing. It's one thing to be providing a service, but to provide a service correctly and to include everybody is so important. That's 100%.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, there's a careful balance there in that, you know, we often hear, you know, terms like tokenism and things like that. Oh, we need the transgender person to be a part of this initiative. So we have that, we're checking that box off, like many of our people in our community talk about. But it's really about, you know, that's kind of on us as well, in that it speaks to that growing and developing leaders within our community of all ages, so that we do have competent, articulate, transgender, non-binary people who can speak for our community and aren't just a token, you know, check mark on a particular application. Nathan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think the visibility of both leadership and involvement's important, but I want to take it to the next level. I mean, we need to be in positions within LGBTQ plus organizations, but I think Ashley was starting to lean in on the idea that we need to be in all organizations. If you don't have someone of trans or non-binary experience involved in, non-LGBTQ specific initiatives, you miss a tremendous part of the community, and you're unaware of the impacts of what some social service initiative or some other piece of legislation that you think is benign, but could have a really negative impact on the trans community, maybe specifically for trans women or for trans men or just the non-binary community. When you don't have representation at all tables, you tend to miss. And when we, add intersectional layers to that, the impact can be quite substantial. And, there have been a lot of initiatives where we haven't been included in the conversation. We don't find out until later, wow, this is going to hurt the community. And then we have to backpedal. And, so we're just rising to the level in LGBTQ spaces, but in, human resources, in banking, in insurance agencies, in the law, in law enforcement, in, you pick an industry. If we're not at a place where we can be out and proud, and it's the same journey that our LG and B, siblings have been through, that we don't get to the next level of looking at, meeting our needs and being, happy and healthy folks living out our dreams until we get there. And that's the next push. It has to be the next push. But we have to be safe, in our communities. We have to have jobs. We need, health insurance to have, both home and work stability, which most folks in our community don't have. And so when we can get those basic needs met, which is where we see our push often, then we can get to, I think, where we all should be.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, is that it really needs to be hand in hand in reference to having everyone have equity in reference to the same opportunities to, be able to provide for their families, to be, economically, stable and thriving, and have a good job and have a voice that they can really bring to the table. So I think all those things are very much intersecting, and speaks to the next question. Perhaps they get tougher as we go. But think about it for a minute, and of all the challenges facing our trans and non-binary community, what would you put in the top three? And we talk about, there's so many in reference to coming out of this administration. We've got pushbacks, against trans healthcare, the trans military ban, healthcare for our young, proposing a ban and a felony conviction for providing best practice healthcare for our young people, issues in our schools, homelessness, incarceration issues, on and on. But if you could, what would be your top three? And what are the initial steps we need to make to solve those? Tough one, I know.
It's hard to think of just three.
Yeah, right?
I know. Top three, and everybody
top three today, this week. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
I really always, when asked that question, I always like to, point it out and say that, it's really a trickle down effect if you think about it. Because if somebody does not have, that support, right, system, then a lot of times they don't have that confidence that, they're able to do all these things and, have the same, equal opportunity for employment, for housing. And so then they're not able to get a job, right? They're not able to sustain themselves and have a roof over their heads. And so, oftentimes, I always point it back to that is, we need to make sure that we are giving the individuals that, ability to have that right mental health, right? Because just because we're transgender individuals doesn't mean that we're mentally, incapable of achieving all these things, right? I think that's already, we're seeing more of that, and that's proven so many successful examples of that, right? 4 of us being here. But, a lot of times we need to make sure that these individuals, are there mentally. And so that next, it needs to be, like empowering them, giving them the resources. So, housing right now is a big one that we're seeing in our community, especially around COVID-19 times. We're seeing that a lot of them are not able to continue to have, income because of their jobs furloughing them and everything. So, then the individuals are not able to, sustain themselves, and therefore they end up being homeless. And a lot of times, then if we can help those individuals, right, prevent them from going homeless, and a lot of times we're better off having more success, and needing less resources down the line overall. So I would say housing is a big one. Mental health is another one. And Nicole, Nathan, what else?
Nicole, you want to go?
Yeah, I would say, mental health is huge. If you really think about it, someone going through a transition or just having to deal with being in a marginalized community, what happens up here, a lot of people think last about, you know what I mean? It's like, and it's so important. And the military ban, you know what I mean? Banning a group of people, regardless of this group of people, banning a group of people from joining the military to fight for your country takes my breath away. I cannot comprehend it in my head. I've thought about it and I just cannot comprehend. So that's definitely at the top for me as well. What about you, Nathan?
Yeah, I think I do. I struggle to get to 3. I think if I put myself in the mindset of us focusing our efforts, if we could only focus on 3, and we focus on the things impacting the most marginalized in our community, which frankly will be the violence we see Black and brown trans women facing, the violence our youth are facing, then the other issues, because this is about like our humanity, seeing us as humans. If we focus on the most marginalized in our community, I'd like to hope the rest would sort of fall behind. I don't think it's the order of how we do the work, but I think it should be the order of how we do the work. And then third, getting protection enumerated based on, gender identity or expression in employment, housing, and public accommodations could, hit some of the things that are just sort of the minimum standards that all humans, all citizens of this country should have. But the hardest work, it's a big lift, but I think if we do the hardest work, we get the biggest gains.
And, something that we haven't mentioned is, sex worker protections.
Yes.
Like survival sex work is a thing.
Yes.
If you don't know what it is, look it up. You know what I mean? You have to, at the end of the day, regardless, your stomach is still going to want food. You still need a place to live. You know what I mean? Like survival sex work is a thing, and the treatment, the violence, the discrimination, that happens to sex workers is unreal. And that's definitely something at the top of the list that needs to be addressed as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that in looking at this and coming out of 2018, when Florida was the epicenter for transgender murders of Black transgender women, in looking at this, a lot of it was very patterned in the fact that in addressing this, we almost were addressing the symptoms instead of the actual illness. Because in many cases, it touched on all of the things that y'all just talked about in reference to someone initially somehow falls off the grid, right? They lose their job, they're discriminated off the job, they lose their job. They become homeless, so it touches on that. They are hungry, so they need to resort to extreme measures to be able to feed themselves and shelter themselves. So they may resort to sex work, putting themselves in harm's way, law enforcement intrusion, and in the end, transgender violence, and usually against transgender Black women who have followed this cycle of violence, really in a survival mode. So, it touches on all of these things, and, how can we disconnect that cycle? We've thought about taking the approach of start at the beginning. Let's educate employers so that they don't discriminate against that person, so they don't take that first step in falling off the grid, and this leads to this pattern, to other measures. So thoughts on that? Nathan, I see you're thinking.
Always thinking. I mean, the lift is so big. This is why we need more visible advocates. We need an army of allies. there are not enough of us, frankly, to do all the work. And I think there's a presumption that there are systems in place to catch people, that there are safety nets. But when we're looking at continuum of cares that are supposed to, look at, when we get to food and in-house home insecurity issues, we think there are organizations in place. But if a number of the continuum of care organizations are religiously affiliated, never get training in working with the trans community, or if we look at the criminal justice system and we look at law enforcement agencies unwilling to get training in working with the trans community, it will go bad. I mean, we have to have advocates in all of the spaces. And if you're not a member of the community, standing up as an ally and then, reaching out to those of us who do this work and saying, okay, I've opened a door, let's come in and have a really hard conversation. Because we're willing to do that. I mean, it requires all of us, frankly.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So well said. Nicole, your thoughts?
I think it's huge. A big piece of it is education. Yeah. And education can come in so many different forms. For me, I'm more referring to something like this, where it's a conversation that's going on that turns into education, because once it falls into the Google sphere, whatever you want to call it, anybody can look at this, and like if someone's doing a project, they can pull this up. So conversations, just continue to have those, and open and honest. You know what I mean? I think sometimes, and it's always, yes, important to be politically correct, but I think at the same time, there's an element of real that needs to come through a lot of these talks. And that's what I love about Trans Talk, is that when you look through, we're having some hard conversations, but these conversations need to be had. It doesn't always have to be the pretty conversations tied in a bow. The world isn't pretty and tied in a bow. We have issues, so I think the more we talk about it, the more we continue to educate people, be open about it. I think that's, a way that we can kind of try to combat this.
Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. Ashley?
Yeah, I believe, something that I'm really looking forward to is that with GAP, right, the Gender Advancement Project, is that what we plan on doing as well is, is looking at every individual that reaches out, for assistance, right, and finding out where is the individual, because we have the broader spectrum, right, that the group is, doing the resources for, that we're gapping that. But reality is that, we need to also, somebody needs to be the one doing that initial assessment, right? That needs assessment. What does that individual truly need? Because oftentimes, we hear that they don't have this opportunity or that opportunity, but reality is that, the individual, what is their true? And so today, for example, I received a phone call of an individual who is homeless, and the first thing I had to do was reach out to them and have that conversation. I want to help you, but I need you to share a little bit about your story. What position are you really in right now? And after hearing this individual, share with me, it becomes the same thing repeatedly, is I want to better myself. I right now don't have any family support, any friends, homeless. And so obviously working with an organization that offers a mental stabilization program, like through housing of like 12 months, right? Where this individual is not going to be able to be admitted to that, stabilize their health. And now next, we're going to be working with them on, what is this individual's goals? What do they want to do? Are we going to be able to empower them when it comes to, education, or is it some sort of vocational training, right? What piece? But, it's really, like I said, it's a domino effect. So we need to take it back to the roots, right? What is happening, and how are we going to be able to, change that dynamic, that story? But it's going to be very direct work that we're going to have to be doing, and that's another way that we can fill in that gap.
Yeah, so true. And that's a great segue into the next question. I wanted to kind of go into a kind of a rapid fire round. And as an organization, TransAction has grown from its inception in 2014 to where we're truly seen, and I'm very proud to say that we're seen as somewhat of a model that other states emulate. We've grown a network of over 400 people connected across the state. We're working with our trans and non-binary youth. We're growing leadership in all those areas. But what can we do better? So let me throw out an issue, that's facing the community, and this has been all of this has been so exposed during COVID-19, and we'll just kind of rapid fire going around in reference to, as an organization, as TransAction Florida, how can we better support these issues that are impacting our community so vividly right now? So we'll start with healthcare. Just jump in.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot of the insurance companies right now, what their definition is of what our trans community needs is really not aligned to what a trans individual truly needs, right? So healthcare wise, that's a big, something really big that we have to work on. That's definitely very important. And at the same time, it's having those in healthcare, making sure that we heard education here. That's a big one too with healthcare. Ensuring that oftentimes I see so many posts on social media from trans individuals that, visit hospitals or, some sort of healthcare facility. And unfortunately, they almost feel harassed in some way because of the questions, right, that they're asked or anything because of a lack of education. So that's definitely a huge one as well.
Yeah, and you hear from a lot of people, transgender people, that say that they're actually training the hospital staff or the healthcare staff in reference to how to engage them. So yeah, education is so important. Nicole, something to add on healthcare?
I think it's just kind of continuing, especially the work that you do. It's a meeting with these large healthcare companies and letting them know, this is how you can change this. This is how, we can be more inclusive. A lot of the companies that you met with, when you first met with them, they were at maybe like level 2, and now they're at like level 8, level 10, where individuals are going there and feeling comfortable to work there, feeling happy and proud to work there. So I think it's just continuing on the same track of, offering these trainings and offering help with policies and procedures and everything that TransAction does.
Yeah, it's been very rewarding that a lot of these companies, they don't just stop with one training, that they do multiple layered trainings of, leadership, compliance, hiring, middle management. So they really are developing a comprehensive, corporate culture in reference to transgender cultural competency. Nathan, what to add?
Yeah, training from the top down and the bottom up. The time for me to, make sure my doctor is culturally competent is not when I'm in the middle of a doctor's appointment. I have trained doctors every time I've gone, and I have offered trainings to their staff. I frankly haven't had any of them contact me, and there's absolutely no presumption that if you are a member of the LGBTQ plus community and in the medical profession, that you are entirely competent in working with the trans and non-binary community, right? So education is key. And, I've done trainings for hospitals. Some have gone 2.0, some have not. We've got to do more. And an emergency room right now, frankly, as a trans man without health insurance, is the last place I want to be. That's been a real fear of mine through the COVID-19 crisis. And I know that, because insurance is tied to employment, unfortunately, having access to healthcare, becomes even extra tricky. So unfortunately, healthcare is not a single solution. It requires a complete system overhaul.
Yeah, and it's certainly, a light's being shined on that by COVID-19, that it's such a precarious time for the community and dealing with healthcare, insurance issues, things like that. How about let's shift to another topic that is certainly germane to the transgender community, and that's homelessness. It strikes so home to me in the fact that we had just recently, in cooperation with the Win Orlando Alliance, we had done this huge workshop on transgender cultural competency and homeless shelters, federally funded stakeholders and that kind of thing. And that very week was when the Trump administration rolled back the equal access rule, which basically took out protections for trans and non-binary people in homeless shelters. So again, is it education, or do we need to do more?
Yeah. Work to do. Yeah, we definitely do. I think a big piece of it, yes, is that education. But having worked directly with this, for the past 18 months, I can tell you that a lot of what's happening is that, most of the shelters are, to capacity already. So we need to create more funding. We need to find more sources of funding when it comes to creating, more shelters, and the piece is so important, the education piece. And, we keep going back to that, but the reality is that it is true, because oftentimes what we have seen is, that, and we continue to see time and time again, is that a lot of times, a lot of the shelters, and like you mentioned, Gina, like we've done some progress here locally within that training. But in the past, before that, a lot of the shelters were still, and it's still happening, but we're seeing improvement, right? But a lot of the shelters were housing and are housing individuals based on their gender that was assigned to them at birth, right? Birth, instead of their gender identity today. And
Right.
so their actual gender identity. So then a lot of times I hear from individuals that they don't want to go to the shelters. They rather sleep in their vehicles. They rather sleep on the street, because when somebody is, for example, if I had to go to a shelter, obviously you put me in the men's section, I'm most likely going to be receiving violence, and people are going to be harassing me to a degree as well, the men. So, that's typically what ends up happening when individuals do go to those shelters. So they rather not actually seek that help.
Yeah, great points. So well said. Nicole, anything to add?
Just that, I love that we have like a resource guide, and hoping that we can continue to get shelters to want to be a part of that, want to be inclusive. It's hard. Homelessness is such a hard issue. What they're going through and trying to navigate all of that, we sometimes fall through the cracks. Like Ashley said, a lot of people would much rather sleep on the street than go to a shelter. And that says something. I think it's not talked about because homelessness it affects such a wide array of people that, like I said, it falls in the cracks, but it's up to us to kind of continue to shine the light on that and say, hey, there's a group of people who are coming to these shelters who need these services but aren't being treated correctly.
And I always point back to that, our community, what we don't need to continue to have shelter after shelter created. What we need to have is some sort of program where the individual can go to, which is something that I referenced earlier that, Aspire right now is doing to help a lot of, residents here in Orlando, where you're not just going to allow somebody to go and spend the night, right? Or take a shower or get some food. Is you're going to work with the individual to take them from where they are to eventually the outcome is for them to be independently integrated into society, right? With their own place, with employment. So that's more of what we need when we touch on homelessness. While we know that there's all those other pieces, education and all that need to happen, we need to also look at, how are we going to be able to grow out of that? And it's going to be by having programs like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So here's a tough one: law enforcement and incarceration issues involving transgender people. Recently, we had an issue in Pinellas County where, all kinds of missteps were made in reference to housing a transgender inmate, if you would. So let's talk about law enforcement. I think we made progress in working with law enforcement agencies across the state. Coming out of 2018 and all of the transgender murders, we did a great deal of work in Jacksonville. We've done work in Tampa and Orlando. So again, education, but how do we really make this stick in reference to ensuring that our law enforcement is transgender competent and engaging and knows the language, especially when it comes to our expansive community of non-binary identities? And then how do we crack the code with incarceration issues? It's just like school boards. Is your incarceration experience depends on what your zip code is, which certainly shouldn't be. So talk to me about that. Nathan, kick us off.
Yeah, so it connects a little bit when we're talking about working with law enforcement. It's a much bigger issue, but it is connected in some ways with homelessness, because the reasons that folks enter into homelessness or enter into the criminal justice system, often there are some similarities. We have to get training done without a question. But those law enforcement agencies have to want that. So if they don't want it, then we need to look at, getting training to public defenders or to state attorneys, if in those jurisdictions they're willing to do that. So very much it depends in this state whether you're going to have an office that's willing to do that. I know in Pinellas, we have folks who are attorneys who are representing clients that are doing a great job and are advocating on a case-by-case basis, but it's not happening across the system. And it also means then educating law students. So when they get out there and they're representing those clients who are trans, which is frankly where a lot of my work started, they will interrupt that cycle. And I'm proud to know I have classmates that are at PD offices around the state that are absolutely doing that. And it's because we know one another. Sometimes I get a call, sometimes I don't, but I know they're doing the right thing. But then we have to look at our system, whether we're understanding we've got to break down the racism that's happening that is causing our siblings to be in those situations to begin with. And I didn't lean in on this from the homeless conversation, but often if we interrupt that before it happens, frankly, the economic argument, having worked in homeless advocacy, it actually, and the cost is both monetary but emotional and so much more. If we interrupt it before we get to the worst case scenario, which might be, houselessness or incarceration, it works out better for everyone. And we just have to turn the system upside down and interrupt that before we get to that point. And that forces us, and we have to think about this entirely different. There are local mutual aid societies starting to pull people out of homelessness before it happens. We know what our community needs. I think there's a great argument to be made, and some of that work's being done in Orlando as well, especially through COVID-19, and a shout out to my South Florida mutual aid folks that are doing great work down there. We need that everywhere. And we need attorneys to be culturally trained, to be culturally competent, to keep their eyes open. I think they're great partnership potentials, if not with PDs, with local, local legal aid societies, or with local bar associations to say, hey, let's train. And I've worked with some that have been willing to do that as well. So we keep knocking on doors, and we'll go wherever we can get through.
Yeah, well said. And Morgan Leish in our audience pointed out, and Morgan does a lot of work with TransAction, pointed out that this is also a place where more transgender law enforcement officials, PDs, and people working in incarceration would drastically improve the engagement with the trans and non-binary community.
For sure.
Nicole, thoughts on law enforcement and incarceration?
I don't have much to add, but I love what Nathan said about the training lawyers. You know what I mean? And same thing with your law enforcement, training the new ones that are coming up so that they know. I had a wonderful opportunity to attend an event where I guess they had different individuals from different zip codes go meet the new recruits for, I think it was OPD. And it was just nice to be able to sit there and be like, hi, I'm a trans woman and this is what I go through. And you can see some of them are like, oh, wow, I didn't think about this. Or some of them were like, times are changing. And I thought that was amazing that a few of them, probably one that sat down at the table would be like, we got you, things are changing. And I love to see that. I love to see that, there's law enforcement who are like, I'm not going to look at people different. I'm going to look at them for who they are. And that's what we really want.
Yeah.
Yeah, so true. Okay, let's, here's a really, I think, a interesting and fun one is, at what point in the state of Florida are we going to get progress to a point where transgender elected officials get elected? Transgender candidates get elected in Florida so that we can truly, change public policy in the state. We've made all this progress in reference to human rights ordinances across the state. We fought back transphobic bills in Tallahassee for decades. But I think the true tipping point will be when we truly have elected representation from the community, making laws and talking about public policy. So some thoughts on that. I'm sure, probably everyone in this chat room are eligible and would be amazing candidates to run for office. So I hope you do at some point in time.
I vote you, Gina.
Thoughts on that? Thank you, Nicole. Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. In any social justice movement, when we have a literal seat at the table, things change, and we don't have a seat at the table anywhere in Florida. So we have to make that happen.
How do we get there?
With a lot of visibility and a lot of education, and we build our networks. We have to build our networks. I mean, the power of the vote is huge. If we don't like who's in office, we need to vote them out. And so we've got to get out there and get our community together. I think there are a lot of folks in the trans community specifically that don't engage in the political system because we don't trust it, because we don't see us represented, and we don't see folks standing up for us when the tough votes happen. So I think that we've got to rally, we've got to build our networks, and we've got to get engaged. And a candidate will come forward in the right race at the right time will happen. I wonder if we'll get somebody in office before, you know, we see all of our rights in place. I don't know. It might take that. They might happen at the same time. I'd love to see someone from our community run for office and win. We need folks in office. We've seen that in other states. Florida's, I mean, I'm born and raised here. Florida is a tough political state, but I know that as a community, when we get somebody up there running for an office, we will all get behind whoever that person is.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. Ashley, your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I believe leadership.
Future political office.
I believe leadership is so important, you know, and something that I find unique about elected officials oftentimes is that, you know, they're very passionate about, you know, what they're representing and who they're representing. And I think that, you know, it ties into what Nathan just mentioned, you know, is building those networks and for us, right, to connect, for us to show other people that, you know, we are capable of representing them as well, not just transgender individuals. So I think, you know, those are some of the things that we could do to continue. And, you know, by just sharing our story, you know, being, and I always say too, like, you know, when it comes to us as trans individuals, like if we are full of courage, right, in a society where we're actually living authentically and we do transition, right, and a lot of us do it in the open, you know, then that courage in itself, you know, if we're able to do that, people can do so many other things. You know, there's really no limitations to what we want to achieve. And having, you know, an individual with such courage, you know, think about it, you know, to be in political office, you know, that goes a long way.
For sure.
Yeah. Total snaps. You know, that you know, mold has been broken in other states. You look at Virginia, you'll see what Danica Roan has done and how that whole dynamic in Virginia has changed. And it would be amazing to see something like that in Florida. Nicole, how about you?
And we know living in Florida, like it's a super conservative state. It's tough. You know what I mean? We gotta do a lot of work, but I believe it will happen. We have such progressive areas that if we all come together, we can make it happen. And it really will change the whole landscape of Florida completely, because there's finally somebody there of trans or non-binary experience who is able to advocate for all. Because if we look back to Stonewall, what was it? Trans women of color who were advocating for all to start that. You know what I mean? So we as a community are used to fighting for us and everyone around us. But it would just be incredible to have someone making laws, meeting with constituents, and having young trans people be able to look and say, look, I can become an elected official if I want to.
Yeah, nothing would be stronger as far as visibility than having a visible elected transgender person represent all of us in Tallahassee. That would be huge. We have time for one last question, and this is kind of a personal question. Personally, do you have a goal that you'd like to share with the audience in reference to, you know, if there's one thing you want to get done in 2020, what would that be? What is that goal on your vision board for 2020?
One of my goals, you know, and I've put it out in the universe because I believe if you do that, you know, you'll achieve it. And so it's the Gender Advancement Project. You know, I am very passionate. One of my goals this year, you know, it was initially to actually work on establishing it. And I can tell you that, you know, we're so close, you know, now we have the team already, you know, we're so advanced. And so now it's just a matter of us rolling it out, right? And continuing to build those relationships and partnerships. So that's one of my goals for 2020 is to make sure that, you know, the Gender Advancement, you know, project has helped, you know, at least 20 people for 2020 based on the services that we focus on.
That's super exciting. Trans-led for the trans community in a time when that direct service providing situation is so important and will benefit the community so much. So yeah. Nicole, how about you? 2020.
It's when Ashley and I started talking and figuring out all of this, a big piece of it was we wanted a coalition of trans individuals who can look at trans issues and really be able to speak to them. So that was always a goal, and the fact that we're bringing that to fruition is just incredible, because 2020 has been interesting, but this has been a silver lining to it. So.
And this in itself, it's, when we obviously being home, right, with COVID and everything like that, I always like to look at whenever we go through situations in life, right, that, we stumble a lot of times, is what we make of them. And so something that we found the perfect timing around COVID, being able to spend a lot of time at home was, what are we going to do with this time? We can sit here and do things that are not as constructive, right? Or we can actually take some of this time to actually put this together. And it's been countless amount of hours, that we spent, around this. But, it's something that also came in a time where, people are, not able to have jobs, not able to, to achieve a lot of, the things that they were normally achieving. And so, I think that's something else that, eventually down the line, that's something that's is going to be part of the history of, GAP, the Gender Advancement Project, is that it came in a time, like this. We made the best of it.
Yeah, so well said. Thank you for that. And Nathan, briefly, your thoughts, vision in 2020.
Well, my hope in 2020, I'm doing it virtually, but what Ashley and Nicole are doing in Orlando is quite exciting. Things like that are happening all over the state. And my intention personally was to sort of expand my network. There are a lot of local and frankly, next generation community organizers starting some phenomenal projects. And I'm trying to connect with those folks all over the state to sort of figure out where we can strengthen each other. And if there are things I can pull back into the Tampa Bay area, I would love to do that. And so it's a time for me to listen and learn and regroup, because I think I'll be home a lot this year, but then, next year, watch out.
Next year, watch out. Remember posting at the beginning of the year, 2020 is going to be an amazing year. Who knew, right? Well, let me thank y'all for being an amazing panel. Your leadership, your community involvement, you're an inspiration for so many people. You're a role model for so many people. So thank you for taking the time to share your experiences and your goals and your aspirations and your personal stories with us. And, as we close out our final session of TransChat, I want to say to everyone out there, thank you so much. Our viewership has been amazing. It's been through the roof. I want to thank Nicole for being an amazing moderator for 2 of our 4 panels, and especially for the community who has been so involved in supporting our work at TransAction and at Equality Florida. This work will continue. We know there's a lot more work to be done. We know that visibility will lead to awareness. Awareness will lead to education. And with education, we will achieve equality and equity. And this is a part of that. This is a visible representation of the best of our community. And I thank you all for being here. I thank you for your words. And I thank everyone out there for supporting TransChat this whole week. Thank you.
Thank you, because if it wasn't for you, these things wouldn't have been happening. You founded TransAction with Equality Florida, and I'm here today as well because of you, your story, your visibility, and that goes a long way. So thank you very much for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Take care. Everyone out there, be safe, be well.